McCarthy Insurance Group, serving the community for over 70 years. For home, farm, motor, life, health and business insurance, log on to mig.ie or free phone 1800 50 11 11. Probably your best call in 2024. Charles McCarthy Insurance is trading as McCarthy Insurance Group, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Now, real people, real opinions. Nighttime talk with Niall Boylan.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
Today the Cabinet set out to agree on a chairperson of the COVID-19 inquiry. Taoiseach Micheál Martin said the review would be an evaluation of how the country performed during the coronavirus pandemic. The inquiry will be non-statutory, will seek to provide factual account of the overall strategy of the handling of COVID-19 in Ireland. Recent studies in the Lancet Medical Journal indicate that Ireland did better than we might have thought in terms of mortality, notwithstanding the huge impact that COVID-19 had on the lives of so many people. There's also been numerous pieces of research out there now, we know this now, that countries that had the longest lockdowns, Ireland had the second longest lockdown in the world. Next to Cuba, I think it was, or one of those countries. We had the second longest lockdown in the world. Countries that had the longest lockdowns versus countries that has no lockdowns, realistically. For example, Sweden, states in America like Florida and Texas had very little lockdowns or restrictions. They fared off equally as well as Ireland. There is no evidence studying, but there was an overall study done of all the countries in the world that had lockdowns, restrictions, and everything else, and masks and all that. And there is no evidence that any of that really made any difference whatsoever. A virus is a virus, and a virus will spread, and it'll find a way to spread. And it just did. No matter whether you had the lockdowns or you didn't have the lockdowns. It just found a way to spread. So, and mortality turned out to be, thankfully, not as bad as we thought it was going to be initially at the start. The first 3 or 4 months, like for everybody, was pretty scary because we didn't know what COVID-19 was. And we were seeing these videos from China of people dead on the streets. It was bananas. Turned out not to be like that at all. Really, in my view, we should have focused just on the elderly people who were the ones really at risk. They were the most vulnerable. Those under the age of 65 really weren't affected really that much at all. Yeah, we got COVID. Some people got quite sick, but very few people died under the age of 65 of COVID-19. Not with COVID-19, of COVID-19. Anyway, let me go to Sharon. Sharon, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall. Good, thanks.
Overall,
Good, thanks.
How do you think the government handled COVID-19 overall? Or is that 2.5 years of your life just a blur?
Yeah, kind of was. I think it affected young people quite badly. You know, I think they got anxious and it interrupted their lives. And I only ever believed, like you, that, you know, the elderly and anybody who was vulnerable should have been kept.
Yeah, those who were compromised, immunocompromised or other.
Yeah, I never believed throughout the whole thing that we all should have been locked down. You know,
no,
it just felt ridiculous.
Well, knowing what we know now, it made no sense. No, it made no sense.
I thought it at the time. I
remember when Leo Varadkar stood on the steps of Washington. It was quite serious at that stage because we didn't know what we were dealing with. So I do understand the first couple of months, where we said, we better just lock everything down. We find out what's going on here. And I get that. That's what a government should do. But within a couple of months, we knew, the evidence was there that the mortality rate was, those who were the elderly. We should have known that. We didn't need to do it to everybody.
Yeah, when that was known, really, then they shouldn't have, they shouldn't have kept the lockdown going.
But they did.
Yeah, I can remember being at a bloody social thing with a rope dividing the vaxxed and the unvaxxed.
That was horrendous.
It seems laughable now.
What a way to treat people. Sure, a woman in Cork was put in jail for not wearing a mask. What a way to treat people. There's people in this country, for example, who've been guilty of having images of child porn, and they don't go to jail.
Yeah, and now they're saying you're not allowed to wear masks. They're saying that's the people out in the protests. You're not to wear a mask.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I know. It's a bit mad, all right, wasn't it? It was a mad time, And what the worst people were, in my view? The curtain twitchers. Do you remember the curtain twitchers? They were the ones who were looking out through their windows and going, oh, look at her, Mary. Her and John are going out in the car past their 5K. Look at them. Look, I'm reporting them. They shouldn't be out then. Oh, look at Johnny up the road is having a party and there's 9 people in his house, not 6 like the government said. You know what I mean? It's like some of it just became bonkers.
Yeah, a bit scary how people can turn on each other. I mean, I know the thing about the lines. Jesus, if I got anywhere near anyone, oh my God.
Oh, I remember one day in Tesco, I sneezed in Tesco one day. You think I was guilty of murder. Security came over and asked me to leave. I swear to God. The security guy comes over to me and says, everything all right? And I said, yeah. And he says, we've just had a complaint that you were sneezing. And I said, it was just something in the air, maybe dust or something. And he went, I'd like to ask you to leave the store. I said, you're joking me. They asked me to leave Tesco's because I sneezed.
Jesus.
I think he thought I had COVID or something. Anyway, David, hi. How are you?
Niall, hi. How are you? You probably don't want my views. I think the entire senior medical department people should be put on trial, taken to Nuremberg, and put on trial under the Nuremberg trials, and probably end up being hanged.
Let's not go that far, okay? I mean, there were a lot of mistakes made.
No, they completely breached the Nuremberg Code, written to stop what the Nazis did at the end of the Second World War.
Well, I know a lot of people said that at the time, and I remember reading the code. I remember reading the code, and if you went through the whole 10 steps of the code, it did look like we were in breach of a lot of them, to be honest with you, yeah.
Yeah, and I take it you're aware. It's nice how there's in Holland on the 27th of November, there's the second court appearance for Gates and all the rest of the criminals for what they got up to with their lying about the COVID vaccine.
Well, I know some people weren't in favour of the vaccine, David, and that's their choice. And by the way, can I just say, during COVID-19, I always said, I was one of the few broadcasters who said, look, if you want to get the vaccine, you get the vaccine. If you don't get the vaccine. That's your choice. I got it because I wanted to go to America, actually. I wanted to travel. And that was the only reason I got it.
I'm perfectly happy with that argument as long as people are being told fully what the situation is. And the fact of the matter is, the medical profession have been trying to find a coronavirus vaccine for the last 65 years, and they still haven't. And what the Western politicians and managed to do was to make billions for the farmer. Billions. Now, Ireland has got a lot of farmer in this country. The various production sites for pills and potions.
I mean, look, to be fair, David, I don't want to go down the vaccine route tonight, but, I didn't want to talk specifically about the vaccine, but there have been a lot of successful vaccines. There have been a lot of disastrous ones too, by the way. But there
Sorry, which one? Are you saying the polio? The polio was a disaster.
No, smallpox was a successful vaccine.
Okay, yes. But the polio...
I mean, the MMR vaccine in general has been a success and saved probably billions of lives. But look, let's not, because me and you could get into a vaccine debate and start shouting and roaring at each other for 20 minutes. That's not going to achieve anything.
No.
Okay, getting back to COVID-19, just quickly, because I've got 30 seconds before the news here. In relation to the way they handled it, lockdowns, masks, social distancing.
Marxist. We've got too many lefties who want to close down, all this nonsense about hate speech laws and all the rest of it. All these people, they're lefties. They've come out of university. They know diddly squat. They can't run anything, and they don't know what they're talking about. And it was an absolute disaster for all the kids, all the education. And at the end of the day, if you look at the death rates across the world of flu or coronavirus over the last 10 years, there was no difference.
But I know in most countries, excess deaths were pretty much in and around the same as they were before COVID-19. In other words, it didn't really change anything. Yes, the year before COVID-19 even came along, I think we had a pretty bad year actually for the flu in Ireland. There was 500 or 600 people died directly of the flu the year before, and many people get very badly damaged by the flu as well every year. So I always say to people, take care of yourselves when it comes to, obviously walking around sneezing in each other's faces and coughing in each other's faces. The only thing we think we might have learned was to wash our hands properly. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Listen, after the break, I want to take a few more calls on this. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, David. Sorry for cutting both of you short, but I'm just running behind time tonight. I want to get your view on the COVID-19 inquiry that the government has said today will happen. And I'm asking you, do you believe the Irish government handled the pandemic well? Let's not just focus on vaccines, by the way. I don't want to have an hour-long discussion on vaccines. I know some of you have your views on it, and that's perfectly fine. But let's focus on the whole thing. All right, let me know, do you believe they handled it well? Remember Neffis? I'm thinking of all those key words that we'd never heard before that we learned during COVID-19. We all became scientists and experts, like the R number. Do you remember the R number? And everyone was going around going, oh, Jesus, the R number is 4 today. Do you remember that? And then asymptomatic. We'd never heard the word asymptomatic before. We were being told you have a virus, but you've no symptoms. In other words, you had to be told you had it. It was kind of all a bit surreal, the whole thing, wasn't it? Social distancing. Today, by the way, the remnants of that are still around. If you go into some shops, they still have the line. They haven't taken up the stickers off the ground. They're still there. But mind you, social distancing in itself, when you think about it now, it created a little bit of habit of people to keep a little bit of space between each other. That's not such a bad thing. There's nothing worse than standing in a queue and somebody is breathing down your neck. You know what I mean? So that wasn't such a bad thing. Do you remember we didn't shake hands? We touched elbows or tapped feet together or something stupid like that. And people were saying, oh, we'll never go back to shaking hands again. I'm going, yes, we will. I will. Although I did shake someone's hand the other night. I was working in a gig and I shook somebody's hand and their hand was wet. Ugh. I don't know where they'd been, or they just washed their hands in the bathroom or something, but their hand was actually physically wet. And I went, has anyone got a baby wipe or something? Ugh. Anyway, all those other words that we learned as well during COVID-19, wearing your mask, wash your hands, of course, everything. Do you remember when it started first, people wanted to buy hand sanitizer, but there was no hand sanitizer to be got anywhere. And they were selling it on Amazon, small bottles of it, for like 400 quid. Do you remember some of the contraptions people wore on their heads? There were people with 4 and 5 masks on them. Masks with faces on them. People were wearing full-length balaclavas on their faces. There were people going around with bottles, like to cut off the bottom of a bottle and sealing it on their head like an astronaut. I saw one guy, truth to God, in a swimming pool with a mask on him. How stupid were people at the time? And by the way, I'm not blaming the people. It was the government. There were scientists, loosely termed scientists, inverted commas, on television, telling us to do the most stupid things in the world. Not prime time. Claire, what's her face? Byrne, yeah, on RTE. Do you remember the hairdresser with the contraption for doing the hair through the glass? And then they had 2 people in bubbles. Do you remember all that nonsense? Completely unnecessary nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It was utter nonsense. And the media have a lot to answer for. And I can hold my head up high with no shame whatsoever and being very logical throughout the whole thing. So much so that Keynesian, who were hired by the government, by the Department of Health, to do a report every month about what the media were saying about Neffit and all this kind of thing, they named me, as well as 1 or 2 other people, as being anti-establishment and anti-government when it came to lockdowns. And by the way, I'm not ashamed of that, because it now I was now proven to be right in the end, that they were probably unnecessary. And even Leo Varadkar recently admitted that certainly the last lockdown was completely unnecessary, the last Christmases that we went through. Because here's the thing, we only stopped the lockdowns in like February. Do you remember February of 2022? We stopped the lockdowns, February 2022, I think it was. And within a month or 2 months, the war broke out in Ukraine. And 80,000 people from Ukraine came to Ireland. Ukraine had the worst vaccination rate. And yet, all of a sudden, we completely ignored the fact that people weren't vaccinated. Seemingly, it was really important 2 months previous, but all of a sudden, it wasn't important anymore. It didn't matter. Because, hey, there's a war on, we have to save people. And I understand that. But why was it not important anymore? We were willing not to let people into restaurants. We were willing to ostracize people. One particular broadcaster, well-known broadcaster, was referring to people who didn't wear masks and who didn't get vaccinated as potential murderers. That was crazy. Crazy times. Absolutely crazy. The names that people were called, the way we treated each other. Or some people did. Anyway, I certainly didn't. Let me go to Danielle. Danielle, hi, how are you?
Good, Niall. How's it going?
Good. Now, Danielle, just in general, I want to talk about how the government handled COVID-19. How do you think they handled it?
Very badly. Do you know, because what would they think, like, the COVID, like, think, like, you're a meal was fine.
The €9 meal, the famous €9
remember
meal.
that?
Yeah. Except COVID knew how much you spent on your food.
God.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, what was the whole point of it when they let all the Ukrainians in 2 months later? That
Well,
just
see,
defeated the whole purpose.
The €9 meal thing, that was all to do with Neffit.
don't.
Because remember, Neffit were running the country, essentially.
That's right. What was that lad's name? Tony
Holohan.
Holohan, was it?
Yeah. He became a very
He
famous
just
face on
got-
television. Yeah.
Didn't he? That man just gave me the creeps. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't like him. Well, obviously,
No,
there's a bit of a track record there when
No.
it came to the cervical cancer. Of course, his name was known
Yeah.
already in relation to that.
Exactly.
But in saying that, yeah, a lot of people didn't like the decisions he was making.
yeah. But what was the point of it all? Like, they could have, okay, fine, at the start they didn't know what was going on. That's fine. But there was no need to have all these lockdowns. Oh, we're going into level 5, level this, level that. Remember that as well?
Oh, yeah. Level 4, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember all that, yeah.
Or whatever it
Phase
was.
1,
I
phase
had-
2, yeah. Remember all that.
It was a bit bonkers.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember them all now. Level 5 was like 6 kilometres, wasn't it? No more than 5 kilometres outside your area and all of that. And what was
You
it,
go
6
home-
people in your
and-
house? No more than 6 people in your
That's
house.
right. And when your grandfather was in the house at Christmas,
Put him at the
by an
window.
open window.
Yeah, in the middle of
Wasn't
winter.
that one as well?
Yeah, the man would die of
Yeah, in the middle
hypothermia.
of
Put him
winter.
inside the window.
Did they even think what they were doing at the time?
It was bizarre when you think about the people that were at risk were the elderly and those who were
Exactly.
immunocompromised. And they're always at risk, let's be clear about it. They're always at risk of respiratory diseases. But in saying that, we should have been focusing all our energy on protecting those people and helping those
Exactly,
people. We
because
didn't do that.
No, we didn't. Because they locked down schools, they locked down colleges, and I happened to be in second year undergrad at the time, and it really messed with my head. So it did.
So you were doing it all remotely, were you?
Yeah, and it really got to me.
That's not
kind
the
of
same,
looking at
is it?
screens and-
No.
No, you need to be in a classroom when you're doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you need to see a lecturer's face.
Yeah. Yeah,
because
it's the
it was very
environment is better.
difficult.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me
but,
wrong.
like,
With kids, like with the younger kids doing their junior cert and leaving cert, some teachers and schools were quite good at the remote working. Now,
Yes.
when I say quite good, it still wasn't as good as being there. But some schools were awful at it. In other words, the kids were just off school for 2 years. And that really has affected a
Exactly.
whole generation of children.
Yeah.
know?
And you had toddlers that didn't know any different during lockdowns as well. And when you think about it,
But the kids were
doesn't
never.
surprise me.
But here's the problem: there's no evidence whatsoever that children were at risk at all. It was an
They did say
unnecessary
that.
step. It was an unnecessary step.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But what would they actually thinking? But then again, it's the Irish government.
But it wasn't
Do you
just.
know what I
To be
mean?
fair, it wasn't just. Now the Irish government took it a step further than most other governments because they had the
Yeah.
longest lockdown. But to be fair, it wasn't just the Irish government. I mean, there were other governments
Yeah,
around the world that
okay.
did similar things. Some governments didn't. By
But
the way,
Exactly. Sweden were one that didn't have a lockdown, if I remember. Was it Sweden?
yeah. I remember
Oh,
towards the end,
I can't remember.
just before the last Christmas, the flights had opened back up again, right? And
right.
you could go on a flight as long as you had your vaccine. Do you remember that? So
Oh, yeah.
anyway, I was going away and I went to America. I went to Florida, and I left Ireland, and you had to have your mask on the plane and all this kind of carry on, right? And everybody was still social distancing and washing hands and all that kind of stuff, and we were still all locked down and all that. Anyway, I went to Florida. And it was like there was nothing happening in Florida. There was no
Wow.
lockdowns, no restrictions, no masks, none of that. It was like being in another world. It was the most bizarre thing ever.
I'd say your brain was going, what's going on here?
Yeah. They didn't even, they didn't care about, see, Florida went into lockdown seemingly for 2 months at the very start. And then the governor of Florida just decided, no, this is pointless. We're killing business. This has to stop. So he just stopped all the restrictions.
And all the amount of people that have lost their jobs and that COVID payment, and that they really didn't do it right.
No.
The way they did it was wrong. And this inquiry needs to go a little bit further, I think.
Do you think so? Because they're saying the inquiry won't be a blame game.
Well, who else do you blame? about the Irish government, you know.
I mean,
they took people's lives away.
I mean, I understand it if they did it for the best reasons, right? But some of the stuff that we did was outrageous.
It's bizarre. Absolutely, like.
I mean, the way they treated people who didn't want to be vaccinated was outrageous. It was absolutely outrageous.
Everybody has a choice to get it or not get it.
That's absolutely,
and that's
the way it is. Yeah, that's your choice.
You know, and you shouldn't be looking at people and you shouldn't be asking them, are you vaccinated either?
No. Should you remember people were losing their jobs because they weren't vaccinated?
Yeah, exactly. And you had to have them passport things going into places as well.
Yeah, you couldn't get into a pub or a restaurant. You couldn't go on a flight. You couldn't go anywhere unless you had your vaccine passport.
Wasn't it? Exactly. And it was so restrictive on people because we were used to doing what we were doing. I think it's socially changed people as well.
I had a guy on the radio during the day at the time when I was doing the daytime show, and he didn't want to get vaccinated. And he lost his job. His employer fired him.
What?
Yeah. His employer fired him because his employer said, if you want to work here, you have to be vaccinated. So he wasn't the only one, by the way. Loads of people lost their jobs because of it, which I thought was outrageous because other employees were giving out about him like he was some sort of walking pariah.
Sure.
But stay there. Let me just go to Jason. Jason, hi. How are you?
Good evening, Brian. How are you keeping, pal?
Good, Jason. You know, there was some good stuff during COVID, but there was a lot of bad stuff.
Well, remember, the children were super spreaders.
Oh, super spreaders. Do you remember that, yeah?
Do you remember that? The kids were super spreaders.
Yeah, super spreaders.
Huh?
Yeah.
The government done a brilliant job. They done exactly what they set out to do, 100%. This inquiry is going to be a backslapping exercise where, look how great we were. They wanted control over the people, and they've got it. Look at us now. Look at us now. Like, people are afraid to open their bloody mouths. Instead of locking us up, instead of locking us in our homes now, you put the wrong thing up on the internet now about them and you're gone.
Yeah.
No, they said it. They knew what they were doing. They wanted control. They got it. They scared the shite out of the people. They turned everybody against each other. Nobody was watching them. We were all watching each other and ratting on each other. I want to know the people that were fined and arrested and got convictions, are they all going to be squashed and overturned and that money given back?
Yeah, somebody just texted in and says, I remember the Gardaí were at Dublin Airport, the entry to Dublin Airport, and they were giving out €350 on the spot fines. I think it was probably more than 350 actually. If you tried to pass the line into the airport or you could get arrested. So here's the thing. It wasn't illegal to travel on a plane, but the Irish government said you couldn't go to the airport, which was quite bizarre, right? If you were outside your area.
Like, come on, none of it makes. They were making it up as they were going along. They were throwing stuff out there, seeing what would stick, seeing what they could get away with. But the one thing they wanted to do was put the fear of God in us. The fear of God in us. I was walking through the whole lot, as you know. I spent many nights on the radio with you. I was locked out of my house, wasn't allowed into the house because our baby was born right at the start of it.
And why were you locked out of the house?
Paranoia. Lorraine got paranoid. I mean, Jason, you know yourself, the baby was born very sick. He was born very premature. And he was locked into the hospital. She was sent home. She just got paranoid. And because I was walking away, stayed in her truck. I think I spent a couple of weeks in my truck.
Good.
But she managed to keep it out of the house. Not one of us had it in the house for the whole lot of it. Or actually, we probably all had it. But remember, you don't know you have it. You might have it, but then you won't have any symptoms, but you have it.
You're asymptomatic. Asymptomatic.
Yeah, so how do I know I have it? I know you'd be grand, but it's a killer. What? But you just said I have it, and I don't know I have it, and I'd be grand, but it's a killer. Can you see where the confusion comes in?
Yeah, I know, yeah. But what was upsetting was the country being run by this organisation called NPHET, of course, at the time. And that it seemed that the government were afraid to make decisions unless NPHET agreed to it.
That's their scapegoat, Niall, out throughout this whole thing that's going to come out, this inquiry. Do you know what's going to be said? We were following the best advice possible. Backslap, look how great we are.
And by the way, can I just point out, I don't want to go into too much detail, but the amount of money that was made by individuals, in NPHET and people connected to NPHET, And
with our masks and our gloves and our fast tracks.
and the tests and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of people making a lot of money.
Sorry, Niall, didn't we get in container loads of stuff that actually didn't fit anybody?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but sure, they only dumped a load of one of the hospitals there recently. Only dumped millions of quids worth of PPE, which has gone past its sell by date. And not only that, we bought a load of what's it called, those ventilating machines or whatever we call them, ventilators.
Yeah.
They're all sitting up in Tala Hospital, I believe, in a warehouse. They were never been opened. We bought millions of quids worth of them. Yeah.
Where's that surprising? E-voting machines. Remember them?
Yeah.
They're still being started. The woman who stars them, her husband's a politician.
Well, thankfully, we never had to use them, by the way. But what I'm saying is...
We'll still pay for them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But I just think the whole thing was a complete and utter overreaction. Yes, there were people who died. There is no doubt about that. There are people who died with and from COVID-19. But sorry, Doyle. Sorry?
Wasn't the figures not that off? Weren't they not on like naturally what we'd lose in a natural year? I don't think there was that.
No, there was no. Well, from what I remember reading, and I'll look it up again in a second, but the excess deaths were no different. In fact, I believe they were actually lower during COVID-19 than they were. But now, there's other factors to contribute to that as well, that people weren't having accidents because they weren't out and about driving and all sorts of things.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
But what I'm saying is our excess deaths weren't really any different. We didn't make any real difference. And the evidence now, and there's been loads of published papers on countries who did kind of half lockdowns, full lockdowns, or no lockdowns, and made little or no difference whatsoever.
Yeah, but what I don't like, Varadkar seems to be coming out with a lot of stuff now.
He's kind of admitting it all now, yeah, isn't he? Yeah.
Isn't he? I mean,
I felt like saying when he said that there recently that the last lockdown wasn't necessary before Christmas or whatever it was. He said, I said, why didn't you say that at the time?
Yeah, because I'll tell you why. Because he wanted to keep his job.
Mm.
Who's really running this country now? That's what I want to know. Because it's amazing how he could say all this. He even said it about the immigration, the housing. He's going totally against everything he said when he was in government. So are they not meant to represent us, the people who elect them? Not these people over in Brussels, this new found cabal that they have over there.
Mm. Yeah, I was going to disrupt that cabal if I had to get in there.
I know you were. I will get you someday, pal. But come here. We know. I've said it to you the last 5 years. They're getting back in. They're just bending the numbers again.
Yeah. Stay there for a second. Let me go to Peter. Peter, hi, how are you? Peter Dooley from the Dublin Renters Union. How's things?
All right, how are you? And listen, first of all, I want to say fair play to you for giving the most balanced view of what was going on during lockdowns. It's the only broadcaster, I say, in Ireland that was speaking about it. So fair play to you, Niall.
Yeah.
What you spoke about. And that's one thing, whether you agree or disagree with you, bottom line is you gave a platform for people to speak about the issues that are vitally important.
And there were issues that were vitally important. It broke my heart when I heard people saying that they watched their mother dying through a window of a nursing home because they weren't allowed in near them. The person was dying already.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking stuff. Or nobody was allowed to go to their father's funeral or something like that. That was dreadful.
But they're the critical human stories behind that. Because even myself as well, now I haven't spoken about this much as well earlier, because my brother-in-law passed away in 2021 and only 15 were allowed at the funeral.
Wow.
He passed away suddenly in 2021 and his father was coming from abroad and he wasn't allowed to travel because he only had taken the first jab.
So he hadn't taken the booster.
So he wasn't allowed to travel.
Yeah,
he wasn't allowed to he was in between them, so he wasn't allowed to travel for his own son's funeral. So when you see all that stuff happening and the human cost and so many people as well, you saw the whole disasters at nursing homes and people looking through windows and the inhumanity of it, especially in Ireland. There's a huge part of our heritage as well in terms of funerals and wakes, and more so than a lot of other countries, I'd say in my experience.
But look at the massive mistake that was made at the very start, where they moved elderly people, the real vulnerable people, from hospitals into nursing homes, which were like a hive for viruses. These nursing homes, and yet they moved them from a hospital. That was bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. But there was one case there. I don't know if you remember back in I think it was 2021 as well. I was down with a friend of mine that was working in a nursing home on Marion Road in St Mary's nursing home that they decided to close, and that was actually COVID free, and that was full of people that were, visually impaired, a lot of elderly people, and the staff down there had no PPE or no proper support from the HSE, but managed to keep it COVID free, and yet they then decided to close the nursing home move all the residents out when they were probably more vulnerable to susceptible to picking up a respiratory virus than the vast majority of the population, and they closed it. So like they had all these measures going on at the same time, while they were trying to cajole everybody else and drive emotion and fear into the population to make them comply with their draconian restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
The rights they had on people's rights, like it's basically even the right in terms of vaccination. I spoke out during that period as well, and I was named in the Kinsman file because I organised a small protest outside the Department of Health against the vaccine passport.
Oh, you were named. You were on the list as well. Yeah.
I was on the list. Yeah, I was on the list because I was on the list and I challenged a few. I ran in the elections during that time as well. And I remember I challenged a few candidates about the vaccine passport.
I was.
Their medical choice.
Kinsman informed the government that I was the only broadcaster who was not anti-vaccination because I'm not anti-lockdown.
No.
Yeah.
So I was pro-choice on the vaccine. I always was pro-choice. It's not. Yeah. It's like my view of it is. It's none of my business or anybody's business, let alone the state's involvement in anybody's personal medical choices. And that's still where I stand to this day, or where I always stood. And I think that's important. Where you can't.
It was funny to hear the lefties, by the way. The lefties who were kind of my body, my choice.
Not real left.
Yeah.
But that's the ironic thing.
Yeah.
That's the ironic thing with them, because it's not like you made it into this right-left sort of thing, and it wasn't a right-left issue. It actually.
But that's always the way it is, Peter. Anybody who's against the government is far right. That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter what the issue or the agenda happens to be. I mean, at that time, you had left-wing people, if you want to call them, for about September the word, who would, I suppose, during the abortion referendum, were using the phrase "my body, my choice." And yet, during COVID-19, these same people were saying, no, we're going to force you to get something that you don't agree with, if that's what you don't agree with, which goes against their whole ethos and everything that they hold. And again, I want to say that I've always been pro-vaccine, by the way, but I'm also pro-choice. Yeah. That if you want to get a vaccine, you get it. If you don't, that's your choice.
Well, I feel the same way, but you're right. The point you made is right, because the I won't call them left, because I call them the so-called left, who just showed their authoritarian true colours. They were calling for harsher restrictions than the government. If you remember, going back to that period of time, they were calling for zero COVID, and that was essentially a zero tolerance regime. And they were actually calling for an informer line on people to sort of inform on their neighbours if they were travelling outside their 5 kilometres. They were actually calling for these lines on the media. I saw one of their TDs speaking on Virgin Media about it, and said he wanted an inverted commas rat line on your neighbour. This sort of stuff shows that
there were people doing that. There were broadcasters, there were reporters, journalists going out and videoing people, out on, say, I remember one night there was, a bit of a party going on Wicklow Street or South Anne Street in Dublin. They were all outside having a few drinks. They weren't in the bars. It was halfway through where, you were allowed outside or whatever it was. And this person was going, look at them all, they're not social distancing, this is irresponsible, this is about, a video of all these people putting up online and going, you should know better. Give it up. Stop judging people.
Yeah, it was disgraceful. That was actually, I think Tony Holohan did something like that as well. He went.
Do you remember? Do you remember? He said he drove up towards Fleet Street or in around Temple Bar, and he lowered down the window of his car, and he was outraged at people out having a good time. And I'm going, what, like Lord Fauntleroy arriving up and Lord Jeeves, slow down there and lower down the window of the car so I can have a quick look at what they're doing outside. That was disgraceful.
Well, he famously, at the same time said, don't hug your granny, if you remember that.
Yeah.
Don't hug your granny. All this sort of stuff where, this absolute nonsense which feared the population. I even know myself, even on a personal note, I had friends of mine as well for years and stuff that were, completely taken over with all the propaganda, I'd argue, that came across from the media, from so many elements of the media. And when it's pushed down people's throats all the time, it's important to think critically about anything, about what's going on, and think critically on based on the information that's there. There was a great man who passed away, and I know you had him on your show a number of times, Martin Feely.
Who
lost his job.
That's right.
God rest him. Who spoke out on those issues. There was people like Jay Bhattacharya, internationally, Stanford University professor, spoke about focus protection in terms of protecting the most vulnerable people.
We also talked to the authors of the Barrington Declaration as well. I had them on there. Yeah. I was the only one who would have them on the radio in Ireland. which was crazy.
Yeah.
And these were three extremely educated people, who knew, and basically, again, they were talking about focusing our energy on protecting the vulnerable people in society and not everybody, because there was no need to do that.
Well,
by the way, we know now they were right.
Well, absolutely. If you look at, even the way I looked at it, even I saw what was happening in terms of the lockdowns and the huge transfer of wealth towards the already wealthy people in society. They spoke about the laptop classes during that period, if you remember, the ones that were able to work from home and were unaffected by what was happening. But the non-essential workers, the so-called non-essential workers, but the essential workers were the ones who were getting up and picking up the rubbish bins off the street, doing the stuff that people had to do to try and function in society as well. But yet, so many people were pretty well protected financially from what was happening. And during that period as well, the billionaires in Ireland increased their wealth. There was a huge amount of increase in property values. And the top 300, I think, people in Ireland increased their wealth by about 9 or 10% over the first year of it. And it disproportionately impacted low and middle income earners, people who were really who relied on jobs as well. And other countries who didn't try it, even apart from what your previous caller mentioned with Sweden, there was other countries like, you look at Africa, you look even to South America as well, where actually putting people together in these environments and overcrowded conditions and slum-like conditions a lot of people live in created a sort of a petri dish for infection as well. So, fundamentally, it was just creating more problems. Your biggest benefit to anything, picking up any sort of infection or disease, is basically your immune system, isn't it?
Oh, and they've always talked about, with all diseases, herd immunity is always the best thing. But stay there for a second, if you can. Billy, hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. What's it called? Yeah, what could you say about this? The biggest hoax ever. And there's a lot of people should...
Well, I don't think it was a hoax, Billy. There's no suggestion that it was a made-up thing. It did exist. It wasn't a hoax. But did we handle it properly? No, probably.
We've had other diseases before that people have died over the years. I'm 56 in my lifetime. What's called the people in government, there's certain people in certain departments should go to prison, do time. It should be something like a Nuremberg trial, something, because lots of people, there's lots of healthy people. I have lots of friends, very young, that have died recently, and nothing wrong with them. The vaccine is killing a lot of people worldwide. I've seen professional athletes drop dead, footballers, basketball players, you name it, I've seen it all over the world.
I don't want to go into a vaccine argument, and people have their own views on the vaccine, and that's fine, Billy, and I understand that. I'm not going to get in the way of those views that people have. Some people obviously have definitely died from the vaccine because the vaccine, there were side effects to it. Other people will argue that the benefits outweighed the negatives, but I'm not going to get into a debate about it. About the vaccine directly, but we're just talking generally about COVID-19 and the way the government handled it.
About COVID, you were saying about 2 months later they let all the Ukrainians that weren't vaccinated.
No, they weren't. That's right. No, most Ukrainians weren't. No, they had I think they had the lowest rate of vaccinations in Europe. Well, one of the lowest in Europe. Yeah.
And I said, but I said all this had happened. Like I said that after COVID, I said people shouldn't be closing their business; they should stick at it. But that's why all the restaurants are all closing now and stuff like that. They closed for 2 years during COVID. They lost a massive amount of money. Okay, I know they were being propped up by the government, but I knew as soon as COVID would be over, the fucking government wouldn't have anything to do with them. And all these restaurant owners and other business owners, they're chasing their tail the last 2 fucking years. And they're breaking their balls, getting up every morning, trying to make the money. But it's impossible. So a lot of them are deciding to say, fuck, I can't do this anymore. We'll have to close the doors. And then another thing that really pissed me off was one particular company in our county, Dublin, didn't close their doors, and we had to get the stuff out of the ground. Keelan's,
that's right. Well, there was a whole argument at the time that they brought a load of people in to pick fruit. But
they did.
But mind you, in saying that, it is the type of business where you can't just store the fruit. It has to be picked and it has to be get rid of.
Listen, Niall, other businesses that were making billions more than fucking Keelan's had to fucking stop and had to lose money. Keelan should have been no different.
No, well, look, yes, if you're going to treat one business one way, you have to treat everybody the same way. And it was probably, but you said, you were saying at the time, and I actually remember you on the air, Billy, talking about it at the time, telling businesses to stand up and just remain open. But the problem was, if they did that, the guards were calling to the door and fining them.
Well, for fuck's sake, they've lost their businesses now, haven't they?
Oh, well, they have, because a lot of them warehoused taxes that they couldn't afford to pay at the time. And now, as you rightly said, they're chasing their tail. I've got to go into a break. Rob, I'm going to come to you straight after the break, I promise, and Julie. Peter, stay with me if you can. Thank you very much indeed, Billy. The number is 087 188 00. All right, welcome back. Let me just go to Rob. Rob, hi, how are you?
Good night to you. Are you well?
I'm good, Rob, yeah. Everything okay?
I'm just listening back. Yeah, all good. I'm just listening back. Peter there a few minutes ago said the right thing there, Noel. There was only a handful of you at the time that had a kind of neutral opinion as regards the vaccine and what have you at the time.
Yeah.
But it just takes me back to dystopian times, Noel, although we are in them again. If you remember, I mean, there was protests, I think in the second year, there were some protests out there, and I think that's where the hate speech thing was born here as well.
What I found out about the protest was when people went out to protest against lockdowns, the Garda Síochána were sent out to remove people immediately and send them home again, right?
Correct.
But yet in the middle of that, there was a protest, from what I remember, for BLM, Black Lives Matter.
This is it.
And that went down O'Connell Street and nobody was sent home. All of a sudden that was okay.
Yeah, and everything was okay.
Yeah.
So it was a bit kind of virtue signaling there.
Yeah.
Was it? Oh God! If you remember, in the first few months, it was 2 km restriction. That's all you could go. It wasn't 5.
Was it 2K?
It was 2K.
I remember 5 and 6 for some reason, but I don't know. Well, here's my problem. I wasn't affected by that, and I'll tell you why I wasn't affected by it. Because I was working in a radio station. I had an exemption.
Essential service.
Yeah, so it was essential service. So I had a letter in the car all the time, so I could travel as much as I wanted. So
I had it from my own job as well.
Yeah, so a bit of a privilege in that sense that I wasn't affected by it, which I thought by the eeriest thing was, I remember at the very start coming into work one day, and I was coming down, I came out of the tunnel there at the port, down towards the radio station. And I drove out, and normally there'd be lots of traffic around the Gibson Hotel coming across the Eastlink Bridge or whatever. There was nothing on the road. It was like Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And this was like a Monday or a Tuesday.
I remember it now,
It's weird.
It was frightening. And then you had the cops out and about checking the cars on,
Yeah, where are you going? Where are you going?
Where are you going? Yeah, I'm going to work or I'm going home. Where were you? All this kind of stuff.
You're right, it was dystopian. Absolutely.
It is, so 100%. And I think it's brought us into the current dystopian nightmare that we're about to, as regards the hate speech things and what have you. But there was an awful lot of people made money in this thing as well now. Certain groups did.
Yeah, there was huge money made on silly things like COVID tests and masks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the huge amounts of money, massive amounts of money.
And the government washing their hands of making decisions and giving it all to Tony Holohan and the crowd at Neffet.
Yeah.
That was wrong. And there used to be things in the papers at the weekends. Who runs this country? Is it Tony Holohan? Is he the Taoiseach now,
What I thought was bizarre was RTE at 6 o'clock every day. That went on for 2 years. And it was like listening to a radio station, in rural Ireland, giving the death notices in the morning. It was like, 4 people have died today, 120
and we had the mournful music and all playing.
And I'm going, people die every single day of the week. We've never had a national television station telling us how many people died every day. And realistically, when we look back at it now, over the course of those 2 years, no more died than usual. They might have died for different reasons, but no more died than usual. So it's quite bizarre when you look back at it now.
It was a tactic. It was a tactic that was used to frighten people, to scare people not
and
to
it
leave
worked.
their houses.
And it worked. Look at the amount of people that went around paranoid out of their heads.
Exactly. And how many people committed suicide as a result of it?
Yeah.
And then they were doing. If you remember, there this year or last year, they were still doing ads of people to go out and about. And yet, initially, they wanted them all locked up for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Never to leave their houses again.
There are still people who are badly affected by it. There are still people who go around with masks on them all the time. That's their choice if that's what they want to do. You know, and I seen a lad there only recently, and he was driving a car on his own with a mask on him. Now, maybe he had other reasons, I don't know. But there was a lot of that going on.
Were you saying that earlier, if I got in for a swim or something?
Yeah, there was a photograph of this lad in a swimming pool with a mask on him.
Lovely.
You know what I mean?
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, you just couldn't make that up. You know what I mean? So the funniest thing, I remember standing outside JC Supermarket in Swords, and there was a queue, because remember there was a queue to get into the supermarkets. And
That's right, you had a queue.
Yeah. They only allowed a certain amount of people in at a time. And there was a woman there, I'd say she was in her 40s or 50s, and she had a mask on her, right? And it was tight on her face, right? And every now and again, she'd lift up the mask and take a pull of her cigarette. And I'm looking at her going, Jesus, love, you know what? The cigarettes will kill you quicker than the COVID will. You know what I mean? I mean, the hypocrisy and the madness of that. She was actually they were out in the open. I mean, they were out in the open air with a mask on them.
I used to call them chin warmers, those masks. You used to have them on their chins.
Well, I'm going to be honest and say I never agreed with masks. I'm not going to say I'm an anti-mask. If people want to wear a mask, far away my mask. The only reason I ever wore one into a supermarket was because I worked in media. I didn't want some media going, look at Niall Boylan and Tesco with no mask. They would have loved it. They'd have loved it. Do you remember there was murder over 3 people out in Dunleary getting the vaccine before anybody else? Do you remember that? There was like an investigation into it. It was like slaughter them, put them down, put them in jail. Oh, it was crazy.
There was a private school.
Yeah.
Ahead of them. Bray.
Because the doctor had a few spare vaccines. He didn't want them to go to waste, so he rang up a few people he knew or something like that. And I'm going, who cares? You know what I mean? It just became so mad. But stay there, Rob and Peter. Let me jump in there anytime you want, Peter, by the way. Julie, hi. How are you, Julie?
I'm okay, but I'm still traumatised from COVID. Seriously, it was an absolute nightmare. I don't know if anybody feels the same way, but, like, seriously, I'm still traumatised all these years later, and it's still there.
In what respect?
There was, well, that's a good word, actually, to put on the whole scenario. The lack of, as regards guards, nurses, like, I know we did the hero thing and it was just...
clapping your hands on a Thursday. Yeah, all that,
I'm traumatised. And then they did a stupid little dance. Like, we know they were here. Like, I get all that. I understand fully the whole scenario of it. But, like, we were locked up like prisoners. Literally.
Yeah. House arrest.
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it that, because some got it like, yeah, you can go to the shop and all, but like, do you know what? I can't even describe. If I was to talk about it, I'm still traumatised. I can't even put into words what kind of an effect it's had on me.
And do you think you're still affected by it, do you think?
I'm traumatised from it. Traumatised. Like, literally, work, everything, just put it a pause because Leo decided to, well, I don't know, look, circumstances surrounding it, I'm not invested or whatever they're doing. It's not going to turn the clock back. It's not going to give back that time that was lost. It's not going to, like, I'm fuming over a lot of it. Still fuming.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of damage done to society as a whole.
A major amount.
Yeah, I know. I read an interesting report, I think it was done in Pennsylvania, and it was about the damage that was done to society versus the damage that was done by COVID. And they talked about things like people who didn't get to go to a doctor, so they wouldn't have had an early diagnosis of cancer because they couldn't get to see, because remember, you couldn't get to see a doctor, it was all done on Zoom.
Yeah, and then there was also like delayed appointments, there was kids that couldn't get, like,
all of that.
Disgraceful.
Delayed surgeries, people couldn't get that surgery for their hips or their knees, or people started eating more because they were home more, people started drinking more because they might have been at home more.
Yeah.
And all of those things, they tried to quantify or calculate this into early deaths. In other words, what they're trying to say is that people's lives were so badly affected that many people will die younger because of the lifestyle change for those 2 years. And that, in turn, would be more people than was actually killed or died during COVID. That's what they're kind of trying to allude to during the report.
But, Niall,
far more than 2 years.
Yes.
Well,
Rob.
Just on anything with that, like, you know, you look at anything, right, and you look at the cost-benefit analysis of anything. Like, you look at anything, you weigh it up and say, what's the cost and what's the benefit to this? And you think the cost of this is incalculable. As your caller just mentioned there, like, you know, the medical treatments, delayed diagnosis, issues with domestic abuse on the increase, the longest school closures in Europe as well. And now today they've come out with this
Not just that. I'll just point out a major fact. The jobs that were lost, the work that was had, that no longer could be had. And then you had everybody that got paid. Like, it just upside down wasn't the word.
They say that COVID cost approximately the world globally, right? Now, obviously it's difficult to quantify everything, right? But they say somewhere around $13 trillion, right? Mm-hmm. $13 trillion. Can you imagine, we have 8 billion people in the world, if we split that money up evenly amongst everybody, $13 trillion, the way we could change people's lives, we could fix the problems on the continent of Africa with, you know, people starving and people getting diseases and dying at 9 years of age and all those kind of other things that happen every single day of the week that we completely ignore. We could fix all of those problems with $13 trillion and more.
Point was with the...
hold on. This is the thing, Niall. Why should... I'm not trying to be funny here, okay? But why should, like look at the floods in Spain. Now, I'm sure the government is going to help out with that, okay?
Yeah, it's
and
horrendous,
that's fair enough. The government need to help when it comes to unpredicted situations such as. But why should we, if there was 13 million there, help everybody? Like, why should we help who did... Like, I'm not being funny or anything, but there's people who have never helped me in my life. So why should I go help them? Like, I've done good, I've done bad, but, like, why should I help somebody that wouldn't even look at me, probably?
Mm. No, I'm just suggesting, sorry, Peter, you want to say something about the $13 trillion globally.
If you look at it during that period as well, in terms of job losses and places being closed, a lot of people were bought, their silence was bought, like, you know, through the pandemic payment as well, and the taxes that were warehoused, which is now coming home to roost. But the big issue with that was that where do people go for shopping? It was all online. Who's benefiting?
Oh, yeah. Amazon made a fortune. Amazon, I'm sure, were praying that this never ended. Yeah.
Yeah, it was used as a ruse.
Sorry, Rob.
It was used as a big ruse to transfer more of our public money into big corporations. The bigger corporations, multinationals. And, like, that's where you talk about the fake left in Ireland. They were completely silent on this. They're normally screaming from the rooftops about transfers of wealth from public money into to make the wealthier richer. And that's what happened. And they fully support it. And that's what...
Oh, they did. They not only fully supported, they wanted to go further. You're right. People before profit, for example, were calling for, you know, zero COVID or whatever it was. Yeah. But still, stay there for a second, both of you. Let me go to Martin. Martin, hi. How are you?
I'm well, Niall. Good evening. Thank you very much.
Martin, overall, there's a COVID inquiry, obviously. It's not a blame game, according to the government. It's just an evaluation of how we dealt with it. How do you think we dealt with it?
Well, when you say it's not a blame game, according to the government, what they're saying is, you know, it's a whitewash. And that's all it'll be. And it'll be a very expensive whitewash. It'll be like every other whitewash we've had in this country. There'll be experts brought in, they'll be paid very handsomely. And at the end of the day, we, the normal, you know, the
plebs of society.
Yeah, we will pay for it. We won't benefit anything by it, and nobody will be held accountable. Now, when I look back on it, pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, when I look back on it, right, I have things that are indelibly seared into my memory. I can remember Varadkar. All he was short of doing was genuflecting in front of the Chinese Communist Party for all the crap that they sent to us, not donated, sold to us, that didn't work. Uniforms with the wrong size, masks that didn't comply to the standards. The ventilators you mentioned earlier, Niall, it's not just that they weren't needed, they didn't work, yet we paid for them, and they're still here.
Yeah, they're up in Tala Hospital in a warehouse, aren't there, or something? Yeah.
When I think of, and this is one that really burns me. I think of the number of times. Now, I was in your own position. I had a pass because my job. Pardon me, I do apologise. My job, you know, generally would allow me. I had a pass. I could show to the guards and I could travel anywhere, but because of who I am, if I was travelling on my own time, I would not use that pass. And I was stopped numerous times, and every time I refused to tell the guards where I was coming from or where I was going to. And I told them, if you want to arrest me, you better be able to substantiate your arrest on the basis of you suspect me of committing a crime. If, on the other hand, you want to send a summons or whatever else, you do that. And I've been dealing with a few of them since. I deal with it in my own way, basically by, I won't get into exactly how I deal with it, but when I think of one night I arrived home, and I live in the greater Blanchardstown area, and there was a block party going on. And it had been, now I live alone, so I wasn't really aware of it. But the neighbours had all got together, and it was agreed that what they were going to do, there's a local DJ, you know, he works kind of pubs and what have you. And he had his equipment out in his garden, and he was playing music. He had lights, and all the houses in the cul-de-sac where I live, the people were out. They were in their gardens. They were in their own gardens with their children dancing. Yeah. I arrived home, pulled into the garden. I got out. I was standing. I was waving to my neighbours, giving them the thumbs up. And there was one of my neighbours came over and said, "Martin, are you going out?" I said, "No." He says, "Here, have a beer." He gave me a beer. We had a chat. And as we were having a chat, 4 Garda vans with at least 6 guards in each van, and I think it was 3 or 4 cars with another 4 guards in each car, arrived up and started throwing their weight around, telling us to get into our homes. We'd no business out on the street. We'd this, that, you're one of these gobshites, and I'm sorry for the language now, but one of these gobshites comes over to me and tells me on my own property to get into my house. So I told him, and again I apologise for the language, I told him to piss off, because this is my home in my country, and he has no authority over me. The next day, there was, and I'm sorry if I'm getting irate about this, but when I think of it now, when I think back on it, the next day there was a report of a couple who were assaulted, seriously assaulted, in the Blanchardstown area by a group of young men. I don't know who they are. I'm not passing any. I'm just saying this couple were assaulted at the same time that the guards were up here in the area where I live, harassing Irish citizens in their own gardens.
Having a party.
And then only this year we hear that there were thousands of calls for assistance went unanswered by people who called the guards and nobody turned up. Meanwhile, the guards are earning huge money in overtime out harassing motorists and everyone else. Now, okay, I understand there's a human condition there. I can understand the guards saying, well, you know, I'll take the money, I'll do this. But when it comes down to it, the government themselves, the vast majority of them, I would put them in prison for what they did to this country. They turned Ireland into a petri dish. We were basically the canaries in the coal mine, and we still, that's exactly what we are, because...
But it wasn't, Martin, it wasn't just the Irish government, to be fair. It was...
No,
there was other governments involved in this as well.
Niall, I'm not saying Ireland was the only government. Why is it that the restrictions lasted so long here? I'll tell you why it is. It was because Ireland has gone so quickly from being a conservative, pretty much homogeneous, you know, one kind of not social but national background, all that. We've completely flipped in a couple of years. Now, I'm not giving out about people coming into the country. I'm not doing any of that. But what I'm saying is we've become the petri dish of let's experiment and see what can happen here. And the left in this country are just, they are a social poison. We've had senior citizens and sick people left to die in their own homes and left to die in nursing homes without their families around them. Meanwhile, the guards are out doing their Jerusalem dance or whatever the hell it was called. Yeah, we have children who were deprived of school, and not just school, but socialisation with each other. And that, the effects of that haven't even begun to show. That will show effects in years to come.
Because the argument was that kids were super spreaders, as Jason Riceley said earlier on. That was the term that was used. And the children will come home if they go to school and they'll kill granny. Wasn't that was the kind of line that was trotted out?
Yeah, but how can anyone believe the government?
Well, it turned out that was all incorrect, by the way. It was all, we now know from most published papers now, that, as I said earlier on, countries that had less restrictions or no restrictions or no masks fared off equally as well as we did. So
Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, so in saying that, there was little or no difference. Very, very quickly, because I'm running out of time here, sorry. And James, I'm going to have to come to you after the break. I do apologise. So James, if you want to hang up there, I'll come to you straight after the break. We'll ring you back. Sorry, go ahead.
Very quick on this. No. Ireland is always the yes men for Brussels. We've taken the biggest bank bail. The bank bailout and the austerity.
Yeah.
It's always bound down to the masters in Brussels. Did exactly the same with this. See how far they could push the people in terms of the longest lockdown across Europe. Exactly the same. And now they're going to have a whitewash inquiry about for the next 18 months, which isn't even a statutory inquiry, where it's not even compelled to ask for documents or witnesses or people to come before them, and it'll basically achieve nothing. It'll just be a whitewash, lessons learned, move on.
It's just that we've done it. There you go. You've asked for a COVID inquiry. We did it now. It cost a few million, but hey, there you go. We achieved nothing. We know nothing more than we did before, and we're all great.
Now, real people, real opinions. Nighttime Talk with Niall Boylan.
Ireland's Classic Hits Radio.